Oh, wow.
Yeah, you
She really deserves to go. Did you explain like why she?
Okay, welcome. I'm Elizabeth Thompson. I am the Farsi Chair in Islamic Peace, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the second of our Farsi lectures in Islamic Peace for this semester. We are looking for, your suggestions for guests we might invite for next year. So Elizabeth Thompson, EFT at american.edu for the fall. If you have any ideas, please send them along. But let's focus on the special opportunity we have today to approach perhaps the emotional substructure of much of the politics that we're witnessing at the moment with one of the most esteemed scholars of Arab literature in the country. I will ask my brilliant colleague, Doashit, in the Department of International Study. What are we? Department of
School of International Service.
No, we're in the
Global Inquiry.
Department of Global Inquiry to make a formal introduction. And please help yourselves to any refreshments at the back of the room as you like.
No, first of all, thank you all for being here. I want to first thank Libby Thompson for sponsoring this event. We are thinking of the Farsi lectures that Professor Thompson is chairing as a space for scholars from the Middle East and North Africa and people interested in the region to come together several times a semester so we can form a community to think through some of the main issues in the region together. So we hope to see you today, but we also hope we become familiar faces for you and that you become familiar faces for us moving forward with these lectures. So in that spirit, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Nouri Ghana is a professor of comparative literature at UCLA. He has published several books, a long career. I'm just going to read some of them so you get a sense of the types of work he does. He has published on signifying loss towards a poetics of narrative mourning. He also published this very well-known, widely cited and respected book on the making of the Tunisian Revolution, which he issued after the 2011 uprising in Tunisia. He also has the Edinburgh Companion to the Arab Novel in English. And finally, his most recent book, which is what he is presenting on today, it's called Melancholy Acts. And this book is a groundbreaking study that examines how Arab writers and artists have responded to trauma, oppression, and injustice, especially in the wake of the 1948 dispossession of Palestinians and the 1967 defeat of Arab armies. So please join me in welcoming Professor Nouri.
Thanks so much, Doha, for that generous introduction. Thanks to Elizabeth also, for spearheading this really fantastic venture into integrating the humanities in when thinking about international relations and human rights, etc. So this is really good, and I hope my talk today is of some relevance to that effort. And I hope, look forward to your thoughts in the Q&A. I'm not really going to give a straightforward, I don't know what's a straightforward book talk. Is it like the kind of book talk that gives you a summary of each chapter? I did that at the prospectus level and I hated it. And I just did it because all the university presses insist on having it on record. So you write the prospectus, basically, it's the wasted energy. So, because you just write it for that purpose of getting your book. So I'm not going to do that. There is a thread in my book on Palestine, so I thought perhaps I'll just bring that thread together and make the talk about that, so that it can be a book talk, so there's going to be lots of aspects of the book, but at the same time, it also can be a standalone talk. So in that, in that aspect, I thought that's the best way, perhaps, to proceed. And then there's going to be a lot of space, hopefully, more than an hour, for a Q&A, so we can, we can talk. If you're curious about the book, if you haven't read the book, if you want to read the book, you could ask questions, and I'll be happy to answer that. So we have 2 hours, so we have a lot of time together. Help yourselves to the food, to the water, come close, don't be afraid. I'm a very peaceful guy.
It's like being there. Oh,
Yeah.
that's an Arab joke.
Okay, so, since, I mean, this is very cozy, so I could really go on speaking, but I have like something written, some kind of a narrative. So, but anyway, if you want to interrupt, please do. I don't take offense. Interrupt, ask for explanation, everything, so I'm happy with that. But I will start reading slowly and see how things go and look at your faces and see where, where I am. So in Heart of Darkness, a very famous novel, Joseph Conrad's Marlowe, his protagonist, argues that brute force is nothing to boast of when you have it. And this is a quote from Conrad. Brute force is nothing to boast of when you have it, since your strength is just an accident arising from the weakness of others. End of quote. While the contingency of brute force or strength does not make it less predatory, the weakness of others in Conrad's colonial world remains a liability, a compromised subject position that is conducive to colonializability. Colonized peoples do not choose to be weak. They are taken advantage of precisely because of their accidental weakness. The weakness of others means here either their inability to deter or repel conquerors from taking advantage of them, or their inability to defend themselves once they have been assaulted. What is even worse than the accidental weakness of others is their melancholization. And this is the term I will be speaking about. And by that, I mean their production as weak, exploitable, and colonizable. For instance, Octave Manoni, a very well-known French psychoanalyst and a staunch Lacanist, so stay away. He once claimed about the Malagashis. No, that's. Did I lose it? No, I think I didn't put it here. But let me see. This is what Manoni said. Not all peoples can be colonized. Have you ever heard about Manoni? Anybody? No? Yeah, we did. Of course. Yeah. Not all peoples, but I thought this is hilarious. Not all peoples can be colonized. Only those who experience this need. You have to wake up in the morning and feel like, I really need to be colonized today. So like only those who experience this need. Along the same line, so it's not just Octave Manoni. I mean, he wrote this famous book, Prospero and Caliban, about Madagascar. And, it was almost like a justification of colonialism, okay? Before, of course, he revised himself, but it was too late because the damage has been done already, So anyway, so along the same lines, we have Malik bin Nabi, the Algerian, and he says, on n'est colonisé qui si l'on est colonisable. On cesse d'être colonisé lorsqu'on cesse d'être colonisable. So we are colonized only because we are colonizable. We cease to be colonized when we cease to be colonizable. So, I have a problem with this language. So let's see how we can proceed. The question is for me, how do we melancholize? Because I mentioned melancholization. How do we melancholize responsibly? Okay. How do we speak or write about melancholized people, their losses and trauma, without reducing them to the realm of the powerless and the disposable? Is there a way we can confront or bear witness to the pain, suffering, and weakness of others and survive the consequences inhumanely? Writing after 1967 Israeli invasion and occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, Ghassan Kanafani argued that human beings ought to have the right to be weak without running the risk of being assaulted by those who possess and demonstrate superior power. I'm weak. Do I have the right to be weak or not? So that's, because if we want to think about human rights and what it is to be human, I think we need to have a reflection on that, you know? So the plot of his novel, Returning to Haifa, Aad ila Haifa, revolves around the post-1967 encounter between a bereaved Palestinian father named Saeed and his biological son named Dav, whom he accidentally left behind during the 1948 Nakba and the forced expulsions of Palestinians from their homes. This son was raised up by two Holocaust survivors and new settlers in historical Palestine. And because of that, he grew up as a staunch Zionist and is presented to us as an established IDF, IOF soldier at the time of the encounter. So fully aware of his son's victor position, Saeed addresses him thusly toward the end of their fraught encounter. And this is the full quote. That's the quote from Returning to Haifa, sometimes it's translated as the Returnee to Haifa by Ghassan Kanafani, one of his greatest masterpieces after Man and the Sun, and of course other works. So the greatest crime any human being can commit, whoever he may be, is to believe, even for one moment, that the weakness and mistakes of others give him the right to exist at their expense and justify his own mistakes and crimes. I find this very, it's an unbelievable passage, okay? The lesson that Kanafani delivers here is the exemplar of what I call in the book, Melancholy Acts. I call this the melancholy of the oppressed, namely their ability to transform their sense of defeat into a space of intellection, engagement, and solidarity. Saeed's poignant humanist and humane lesson aims to unsettle the self-righteous complacency of his son Dav and debunk the expansionist mantra of Zionism, whose final goal is to impose through brute force its right to exist at the expense of the indigenous population. One major argument of the book Melancholy Acts, I don't have a copy actually, I ran out of them. So I can't even, okay. So one major argument of the book is that we ought to transform the despondent state of melancholization into the groundwork of what I call melancholicization. I needed to invent this neologism, and you can ask me why later. It will become clear because there has been. I don't like neologisms, but when there is a need for them, you need to do it. Otherwise, there is no way of explaining what you're trying to do. So, transform the despondent state of melancholization into the groundwork for melancholicization. That is, we ought to make of lost causes the basis for a persistent commitment to a politics of emancipation, solidarity, and justice. This argument wagers on melancholicization, partly because I believe that it is what is worse than, as Lukács would say, what is worse than the hopelessness of the struggle. You hear that many times. It's a hopeless struggle, lost cause, whatever. So what is worse than that? What is worse than the hopelessness of the struggle is the hopelessness of its abandonment. So imagine, once you abandon, how hopeless you will become. So that's something to be weighed. A lot depends on that small distinction. It's not small, it's a lot of that. The late, Syrian playwright who tried and finally died a natural death, but tried suicide many times. This is Saadallah Wannous. I always confuse them with Sonal Ibrahim, but they're two different animals. But anyway, he says we are governed by, if not condemned. I mean, his word in Arabic mahkumun could mean to be governed and could also mean to be sentenced. So he plays on that one. So we're governed, if not condemned, by hope. And one of his really most inspiring lines is, he says, I see a wonderful dream collapse, but I do not abandon it. أبصر موت حلم رائع وأواصله. Oh, okay. Okay, we'll say that. So, I want really, here to, illustrate the thread I mentioned earlier of an argument, in the book that revolves around Palestine. I have 2 chapters on Palestine in the book, so that's like a lot, in a 6 chapter book. You know, I mean, when I was in Morocco, somebody asked me, why didn't you write a chapter on Morocco? I said, look, you should write it. So there are 22 Arab countries. I can't like write a chapter on each one of them. But you know, but it was interesting that he thought about that. You know, so drawing on an eclectic examples from the work of Mahmoud Darwish and Ghassan Kanafani, I will try to show you and hopefully demonstrate and hopefully you'll be convinced the ways in which literature reenacts melancholy acts and melancholicizes even while it melancholizes. So here we go. So the first illustration would be this one. In Ahmed al-Za'atar, which is a poem written in the aftermath of 1976 siege of Tell al-Za'atar, or the Hill of Time, Palestinian camp in Lebanon, Mahmoud Darwish describes his epic hero, named Ahmed al-Za'atar or Ahmed al-Mansi, as he emerges from the scene of the massacre of Palestinian refugees as follows. He describes him صاعدا نحو التئام الحلم. So this, I provide the translation. صاعدا نحو التئام الحلم means, basically, literally, it means that Ahmed, and Ahmed is of course one of the names of the prophet, is ascending high to bandage the dream. This is clearly a very awkward construction in English, since the right idiomatic expression would be to bandage or suture a wound. Right? I think you know that. I'm not a dream. Never heard it. I'm gonna bandage my dream. So anyway, but that's exactly what he's trying to say in Arabic. Similarly, in Arabic we say التأم الجرح, you know, not التأم الحلم. Right? So the new construction, التأم الحلم, to bandage the dream, can be seen therefore as a distortion or a deviation from the original idiom or base form, even while it clearly remains dependent on it. It remains dependent on the earlier form for its potential recognizability, functionality, and overall effectiveness in the historical and rhetorical context of Darwish's epic poem. In the titular section of يوميات الحزن العادي, or Diaries of Ordinary Sadness, which is an unclassifiable collection of texts that chronicles everyday Palestinianness and their occupation. Darwish starts fragment number 17, if you want to follow the order, with the following observation. أحيانا يلقون عليك القبض وأنت ترتكب الحلم. Literally, this means, in English, they sometimes arrest you while you're committing the dream. So from bandage the dream to committing the dream. So again, you know, in Arabic as in English, the expression ارتكب الحلم, or to commit the dream, is just not fluent. Okay? In fact, it is an idiomatic. The right idiomatic expression would be, for instance, ارتكب جريمة أو خطأ شنيعا. So to commit a crime or an error, you know, unforgivable error. So, I mean, you probably are wondering what is going on here, you know, what is going on? Does not Darwish know his Arabic idiom, for instance, which, you know, would be really far-fetched as a question. The guy is a master poet. Does he not know that idiomatic expressions are fixed and language-bound entities which constitute the distinctive characteristics, if not the ornaments of a given language, its untouchable repository and its most inviolable but untranslatable features? You know, that's what languages are about, you know, you cannot translate us. لن تتكلم لغتي, Pilito said, you know, you cannot speak my language. So anyway, so this is part of it. It's like, yeah, I know the secret. So how come, for instance, that Darwish keeps untiringly fashioning and refashioning the Arabic idiom في مهب الريح, which roughly evokes the irrecoverable loss of something into such variably idiomatic neologisms as في مهب العراق, and في مهب الغياب, في مهب الورق. While anything that is في مهب الريح could be rendered into English as gone with the wind, the new variations on the idiom are practically untranslatable, even though we might always content ourselves with such literal renditions as in the passage wind of Iraq, for في مهب العراق, or in the passage wind of absence, for في مهب الغياب, and so on and so forth. So it should have become quite obvious by now. Let me see if I got, oh yeah, there you go. It should have become obvious that Darwish's style of idiomatic practice seeks to interfere with the received lucidity and intelligibility of the Arabic idiom, to disturb its primitive semantic structure and its seemingly unruffled indifference to the enormity of the Palestinian plight, the urgency of political justice and historical redress. So the particular poetic venture of Mahmoud Darwish, as I see it, consists not so much in his rebelliousness against the transhistorical stability of the Arabic idiom, as in his programmatic attempt to confront it with the mutability and extreme precarity of the Arab and Palestinian contemporary history. His wide-ranging surgical operations on the Arabic idiom seek, therefore, to transplant this idiom in the Arab present. Okay, that is to locate it in and simultaneously open it up to its fierce historical and political contemporaneity. To use the language of the book, Darwish melancholizes the idiom. And by that I mean he makes the idiom carry the burden of the colonial present. ترتكب الحلم, to commit the dream, to bandage the dream, But he does not abandon it without melancholicizing it. That is, without instilling in it the vision of a future free from the injustices of the past and the present. I think I'm done with my talk. Anyway, it is no exaggeration to suggest that the suddenness with which the novelty of an idiomatic expression is recognized. And this is something I lived through myself when I was reading the poetry. Like, there's something wrong here. What's going on? Until you start realizing, this is done deliberately. It's on purpose. So the suddenness verges really on the epiphanic. And I was also tempted by a neologism, which I call the epiphanic, which is a blending of empathy and epiphany. It's like the moment of epiphany is that moment of empathy with the other, or the tragedy of the other. So there is something to be said about that moment, which is like, as you know, epiphany was one of the most prized modernist discoveries. You read Joyce, you read Woolf, you read all these guys, and you wait for the moment of epiphany. Anyway, so it's important. So in ارتكب الحلم, to commit the dream, for instance, which is, as I mentioned earlier, an idiomatic pun on ارتكب الجريمة, to commit the crime, the sudden recognition that this idiomatic neologism departs from the idiomatic standard configuration occurs at one and the same time with the more potential recognition of the extreme vulnerability of the dispossessed Palestinians, whose very dreams have become incriminating. And you cannot even commit the dream, so that's a crime if you commit the dream. So the dreams have become, that's exactly what the idiom and what the distortion of the idiom wants to say. Okay? So the epiphany of idiomatic neologisms or swerves can thus lead the way to political lucidity, empathy, and hopefully solidarity. Okay? So the haunting resonance of the new idiom, ارتكب الحلم, to commit the dream, its exposure of the incrimination, because it also exposes while it relates. So in other words, it melancholizes, but it also melancholicizes because it exposes a crime. So its exposure of the incrimination of Palestinian dreams may be seen to exacerbate a sense of helpless melancholy or a thrashed state of melancholization. But what I'm arguing here, as well as in the book, is that such a conclusion is complete because it fails to account for the new idiomatic expression as a melancholy act. So it's not just, melancholy act is not just for size, self-immolations, it's also, symbolic acts that happen at the level of film, visual, or in this sense, written. Melancholy act that stakes a claim to the Palestinian dream of a homeland on their stolen land. As I hope to further demonstrate, Darwish's investment in deconstructing the Arabic idiom bespeaks a desire to make language carry, embody, and materialize a decolonial poetics, and a will for life, for a life free from injustice. So, here's another example. I will use two more idioms. I mean, there are tons. If you go through his there are tons of idiomatic practices, distortions, and neologisms. In a longer paper, which I still haven't published that, so that's why I infused it here. I even deal with the idiomatic neologisms that do not work. They're awkward. Okay. So in the penultimate poem of Diwan One Aqal, Fewer Roses, Darwish writes perhaps one of the most deceptively simple first lines in a poem. وَنَحْنُ نُحِبُّ الْحَيَاةَ إِذَا مَا اسْتَطَعْنَا إِلَيْهَا سَبِيلًا. This is a very famous line in the Arab world. نُحِبُّ الْحَيَاةَ إِذَا مَا اسْتَطَعْنَا إِلَيْهَا سَبِيلًا. We love life if we find a way to it, or if we can afford it, as Fadi Joda, the translator of Darwish, put it. So what is going on here? نحب الحياة إذا ما استطعنا إليها سبيلا. So this is clearly hijacking of the Quranic verse. بعد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولله على الناس حج البيت من استطاع إليه سبيلا. Pilgrimage thereto is a duty. Man out to Allah, those who can afford the journey. Okay. So according to the Quran and Hadith, so this is a pun on a Quranic verse. Okay. And this, of course, some people could see this as a form of blasphemy, and it has been seen. So that just bear that in mind, because it's just plucking something from the Quran and playing with the idiom. نحب الحياة إذا ما استطعنا إليها سبيلا. According to the Quran and Hadith, the Hajj is one of the most sacred requirements every Muslim who can afford it has to perform once in a lifetime. Okay. Not only does it cleanse the Hajj or Hajjah of all previous sins, so the Hajj is big. People go to it on purpose after committing lots of crimes. I'm just kidding. It also allows them to take stock of the history of Islam by visiting the place where the Quran was first revealed, and by recalling events and reenacting experiences that shaped the trajectory of Islam and Muslims. Why does Darwish, this is a question for me and for us, why does Darwish juxtapose here the Hajj, the fifth pillar of Islam, yet not one of its absolute or unconditional requirements, with the unconditional and self-evident right to life? So that's the question for me, when seeing this juxtaposition. I do not think that Darwish is suggesting here that life has become as unaffordable as Hajj, and that therefore death might be the answer, or as he puts it in the second line, وَنَزْرَعُ حَيْثُ وَقَمْنَا نَبَاتًا سَرِيعًا النُّمُوُ وَنَحْصِدُ حَيْثُ وَقَمْنَا قَتِيلًا. And we plant where we settle some fast-growing plants and harvest the murder. Actually, I'm just using here the translation of Fadi Joda, but normally qatila means somebody who's murdered, not somebody who's dead. Because we've seen so many reports about dead people, and then the question is, who killed them? So then it's important to say murder. Qatil means somebody who was murdered. So anyway, Darwish's new configuration of the Quranic idiom may serve to accentuate the fundamental proximity, yet profound discrepancy between Muslims who go to Mecca by millions every year and the Palestinians who lack the basic needs of life, such as food, shelter, and security. Insofar as it cleanses the Hajj or Hajj of all sin, the Hajj is a passageway to a new life, unencumbered by the past. But the Palestinians, Darwish seems to contend, may not have had the experience of life in the first place. In fact, the life that is only sustainable through the diurnal exposure to death is not a life in the proper sense of the word, but an extended state of uncertainty and survival, and lies therefore at several removes from the quotidian experience of life as such. So Darwish's idiomatic neologism underscores the contrast between the theological access of Muslims across the world to a new life through Hajj and the existential predicament of Palestinian refugees and exiles whose access to life has been denied, if not foreclosed at the outset. So what Darwish does with the Quranic and Arabic idiom here is radically innovative, to say the least, in terms of its scope and technical heterogeneity. The new idiom is not only a neologism of sorts, but it is also, as in the case of the other idioms, a transformation of the semantic primitiveness of the Quranic idiom. And this kind of transformation of the new idiom oftentimes falls between two overlapping territories or figures of speech, catachresis and metaphor. And that's something we can discuss, of course. I like catachresis more than metaphor. But the semantic field of نحن نحب الحياة إذا ما استطعنا إليها سبيلا is open textured enough as to suggest that this is not merely a cri du coeur of a disenchanted and disheartened poet, but in no small measure a declaration of resistance and empowerment. Ask me how? Well, I'll tell you. The letter ما, ونحن نحب الحياة إذا ما. The letter ما in Arabic, which precedes ما استطعنا, is also called ما النافية, so that's negative, okay? In which case it could also mean that, and we love life precisely because we do not have access to it. See, so this is the, this is what it takes to attend to the nuances of the practice, the idiomatic practice of Mahmoud Darwish, So, and it necessitates us to stay with him, to follow his, what is he taking, where he's taken us. So for me, Darwish's transformational generative work on the classical Arabic idiom is part and parcel of his wide-ranging literary politics of the colonial enablement. I will discuss one more idiom, which is very famous. I can't get enough of these idioms. I love them. but I think, we have to move on, and it's already 30 minutes. So I have in mind this very famous idiom, which we use even, like on a daily basis, famous farewell to martyrs, تصبحون على وطن, which literally means may you wake up to a homeland. And which is clearly a deliberate distortion of the idiomatic expression, everyday expression, تصبحون على خير, it's like at night, which actually means the equivalent of it is good night, But the literal meaning is like, may you wake up in good health. تصبحون على خير, may you wake up in good hands, in good health, whatever. But nobody says that. Here people say good night. But then, there is this strange hijacking of the idiom here. Darwish here diverts the direction of the everyday expression without leaving it. That is, he infuses it with both human concerns and political grievances. Not only does تصبحون على وطن revitalize the hackneyed expression تصبحون على خير, but it also brings into bold relief the disconnect between wishing people good night and wishing them a homeland. تصبحون على وطن, may you wake up on a homeland. So in no small measure, the intimate overlap or collision here between the residual form of the idiom تصبحون على خير and its novel configuration تصبحون على وطن becomes an allegorical dramatization of the embattled project of Palestinian nationhood. And above all, a call for a decolonial future. By grafting the loss of Palestine, this is important. By grafting the loss of Palestine to the everyday expression, Darwish melancholicizes the structure of the everyday idiom, making it, this is important, making it simultaneously host the promise of a justice to come and reopen the wound of lived injustice every time it is uttered. It's like, think about it. May you wake up in homeland. At the same time, you're saying, I don't have it, it's stolen. I was dispossessed, but at the same time, it's also, it will come. We should persevere. So that's what happens with this idiom. So, the devastating pungency of Darwish's innovation on the Arabic idiom here is a melancholy act that expresses commitment to the project of Palestinian nationhood. I think I'm going to skip because I do.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let me get a sip of water. Sorry for those who are fasting. Darwish, in a few words, Darwish makes the Arabic idiom incorporate and carry the enormity of the Palestinian tragedy, subtly reducing the gap between form and affect. Because here it's an entire practice on form, the idiom of the form. Carefully melancholicizing the Arabic language in the process, mapping into its syntactic structure the idiomatic plight of Palestinians. So here I will move on to Ghassan Kanafani, who was the precursor to Mahmoud Darwish, and he was actually, you might be surprised, Ghassan Kanafani discovered Darwish when Darwish was writing from within the 1948 border. So Kanafani, we'll see the same thing. I mean, I was recently teaching an entire class in Kanafani. We did not read everything, but we read most of what he has written. He was obsessed with the distortion of the idiom. It felt like that's the only way to make sense. It's just to destroy these idioms and recombine them, otherwise, there is no other, there is no other, of course, beyond, the work of the imagination. So so there is no doubt that Darwish inherited that from Kanafani. Anyway, but here I will discuss one short text by Kanafani and explain that. So Kanafani never tired of foregrounding the lived experiences of defeated and marginalized individuals. And you might wonder, why are they interested in that? That's something we can discuss later. And he does not do, he does not do that because he wants to worship the structural vulnerability or fragility of human beings, because we know that structural, we're all fragile, but to draw attention to their man-made plights. This is important, the historical and the structural. That's something we can discuss also. And their struggles, and to use them as the basis for a bottom-up and horizontal vision of solidarity with besieged humanity. So I call this a literary moralia, it's a pan on minima moralia, but it's not really a good pan. So Kanafani's literary moralia is dispersed throughout his oeuvre, but I will here restrict myself, my comments on Waraq ibn Ghazza. Has anybody heard about a letter from Gaza? No? Waraq ibn Ghazza? You did? Very good. I think, there is a YouTube, it's a very short epistle. It's a letter, so it's very short. There is a reading on YouTube, I had to say, YouTube, by John Berger. It's a 15-minute video, and John Berger almost breaks to tears toward the end. So please, if you have time, just listen to that. It's only 15 minutes long, and it's also in translation. And I couldn't imagine somebody reading a piece of Arabic literature in translation and still have such an effect on him, Anyway, so the story is, and I'll tell you the story before I read it. I'm going to repeat too much. So the story is two childhood friends. When they were young, they promised each other that they will stick together, and when they grow up, they will leave Gaza. They're both from Gaza, and they will become rich. They will leave Gaza, they go to California. That's it, go west. So they will go to California and become rich and stay together. But, so one of them has already left. The other one did not have enough money for the ticket. So he went to Kuwait, and then he got enough money, and then he went back to Gaza, and he was preparing himself to leave and catch up with his friend, who prepared everything for him to join him. But in the meanwhile, something happened which changed his mind completely about his desire to leave. And that's what we're going to discover. The epiphany or the epiphany empathy kind of thing. So the nameless speaker of this epistle, who is perhaps a stand-in for Kanafani himself, he addresses his letter to the childhood friend whose name is Mustafa, whom he's supposed to join in Sacramento, California. Mustafa seems to have made all the necessary arrangements for his friend's move to Sacramento to study specifically civil engineering in the University of California. Both childhood friends had long ago, as I said, vowed to carry on living together, to get out of Gaza and to become rich. See? It doesn't get more American than this dream. Mustafa jumped on the first opportunity and left for California, while the speaker moved to Kuwait to make enough money to pay for his trip. In Gaza, the speaker taught at UNRWA schools, but his meager salary was not enough for him. Okay. So it was not enough, so that's why he went to Kuwait. The speaker wrote the letter to Mustafa between 1955 and 1956. So this is, imagine, this is so early on. The Nakba, it was 48. So this was a time when Israel increased its crackdown on returnees to their homes and families. It was known as the David Ben-Gurion War on Infiltration. So imagine, like, people who were expelled became infiltrated as they come back to their homes. And it was, a lead up to the 1956 Suez crisis, which is the tripartite aggression on Egypt by Israel, France, and Britain. So it was in between these brutal Israeli onslaughts on Gaza that the speaker returns home from Kuwait to prepare himself for his imminent trip to California. Gaza's familiar scenes of wreckage, misery, and desolation, not to mention the foul odor of defeat, the 48 defeat, because, the people who were in Gaza were refugees from other places in Palestine. So that's the whole point. So that odor of defeat only intensified the speaker's self-dejection and urge to flee to green California and to sever all ties with Gaza. For him, turning the page swiftly on the wretched homeland and running away from all the obstacles to his self-flourishing in a remote land of limitless opportunity, this was the only way and the only form of salvation that had eaten up the speaker's mind until he makes a visit to his beautiful 13-year-old niece, whose name is Nadia, in the Gaza hospital, and sees her completely amputated leg. Okay, so this is what happened. Let's see. Oh, okay. So something happened, which is, this visit to his niece, and then he learns about her story. Nadia had lost her leg, and this is what he learned. Nadia had lost her leg when she threw herself on top of her little brothers and sisters to protect them from the bombs and flames that had fastened their claws into the house. Nadia could have saved herself. She could have run away, rescued her leg, but she did not. End of quote. Nadia's tale of self-sacrifice, of selfless sacrifice, unsettled the speaker. His egocentric escapist schemes have, compared to Nadia's altruistic heroism, turned into sore points, fomenting in him feelings of ire and self-contempt. Kanafani makes use of the epistolary convention, not only to solicit the confidentiality and trust of the reader, but also to create an overlapping communicative space from which to mentor and mobilize his immediate addressee, Mustafa, and his readers at large. Not only does the pedagogical encounter with Nadia compel the speaker to reckon with the incumbent task of solidarity with his own defeated yet unvanquished people, it also propels him to seek to transform the alienating social norms of intelligibility that feed rather than fight the desire for flight, his desire to flee. It is in this sense that we must understand his final exhortation to Mustafa, and I quote, I won't come to you, but you return to us. Come back to learn from Nadia's leg, amputated from the top of the thigh, what life is and what existence is worth. Come back, my friend. We are all waiting for you. End of quote. Settler colonial power is never more successful than when it drives a wedge between Palestinians and their homeland. The speaker's belated melancholic turn is not a turn away from Gaza, but a return to that uncanny and repressed yet originary and incipient feeling that bound him and Mustafa to Gaza, which he now sees in a new light following his encounter with Nadia. So this is the new Gaza, although there is nothing new, it's just his perception changed. Everything in this new Gaza rose up in sadness. Imagine, ينتفض حزنا, it's like, imagine like an uprising of sadness, sadness of intifadatul huzn over Nadia's amputated leg from the top of the thigh. It was not the kind of sadness that stopped at weeping. It was defiance. Even more than that, it was something akin to the restoration of the amputated leg. In his emotionally charged address to Mustafa, the speaker capitalizes on the spectral. We're good on time? Thank you very much. The speaker capitalizes on the spectral void created by the amputated leg as the focus and locus of melancholy. That is, the process of psycho-affective investment that generates and sustains attachment to a sense of national consciousness and belonging. Melancholic attachment is not confined to the search for the concrete meaning of Nadia's loss, but extends contiguously, metonymy, contiguously to the void created by the disappearance, erasure, and ethnic cleansing of historical Palestine, and to the incumbent task of rescuing loss from loss into perpetuity. Let me see. Before closing his letter by calling on Mustafa to come back home, the speaker signals to him the urgent necessity to recoup and retool the enigmatic feeling he experienced when he was leaving Gaza. And I quote, "This obscure feeling that you had as you left Gaza, this small feeling, this minor, Adania Shibli, who is also a Palestinian writer, very much influenced by Kanafani. Because Kanafani had an eye for the small things, the little things, the details. She's also like that, minor detail. She's Kanafani. So this is what Kanafani has focused on, this obscure feeling that you had as you left Gaza. This small feeling must grow into a giant deep with you. It must expand. You must seek it in order to find yourself here among the ugly degrees of the sea. So Kanafani's letter from Gaza exemplifies how the melancholy of the oppressed operates even from within extreme conditions of precarity, defeat, and weakness, and the way it sets alight in the speaker an infectious allegorical longing for collectivity and solidarity that is, in the final analysis, indissociable from the intertwined and overlapping processes of subjectivization and emancipation. Insofar as it can compel the speaker to recognize the fierce urgency of political solidarity with the amputee Nadia and with her besieged and bombarded Gaza, Kanafani's story is the product and example of the melancholy of the oppressed, in which melancholization emerges as the symptom of colonization, while melancholicization as the midwife of decolonization. I want to finish with some kind of a theoretical little sketch, okay? And then we can have a discussion, because I can see, okay, so let me see. There is a widely accepted, this is my theoretical sketch, because I'm jumping a little bit. There is a widely accepted liberal humanist view that mourning is progressive and melancholy is regressive. So, Freud may have suggested as such, or as much before he reversed course. Walter Benjamin had at the outset understood the creative art of melancholy, despite his well-known invective against left-wing melancholy. Fanon is perhaps the first psychoanalyst who appropriated the modern European concept of melancholy to the colonial context. In Fanon anti-colonial psychoanalysis, the concept of melancholy acquires a militant and combative edge, not unlike the one it has later acquired in the context of queer activism. If Edward Said is right in arguing that when concepts travel, they become radical, okay? Then there is perhaps no better example of a traveling concept than Fanon's melancholy. The weaponization of melancholy by Fanon may sound a bit exaggerated, yet it is understandable from within the context of decolonization, in which every insurrectionary asset, including affective archives, has to be mobilized in the service of the war of independence. In his work on postmodernism, Frederick Jameson laments what he calls the waning of affects into mere intensity in late capitalist Western culture. In his other work on national allegory, he laments the attenuation of cultural politics in Euro-America. But in order to point out toward an alternative model in which cultural politics still matters, you have to reach out to non-European cultures. He makes eclectic forays into Asian and African cultural arenas in order to underscore the politics of literature and film, a politics that is still dominant in non-Western cultures, but that has gone lacking in the West. The same can be said about affect. Affect in non-Western cultures, such as the Arab world, has not waned. Yet, unlike the Orientalists tend to view Orientals as passionate and emotional or impulsive to the extreme, as in Salih's, revision of Shakespeare's Othello, seasonal migration to the north, if you're familiar with it. Modern day Arabs, for one, experience affect at the intersection of the individual, the collective, and the political. The recent 2011 Arab uprisings, for instance, started primarily as a visceral affective response to the self-immolation of Mohammed Bouazizi in front of the municipality headquarters in Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia. They went on to wreak havoc in one dictatorship after the other. So throughout the book, Melancholy Acts, I call for a comparative ethics of reading the narrative temporalities of the site at the crossroads of geopolitics and poetic form. Attending to the particularities of the melancholicizing practices, as I described them, and the idiomatic rephrasing. So attending to the particularities of these melancholicizing practices as they come to be rhetorically embedded in specific theoretical, visual, or literary texts, as those by Darwish and Kanafani I have discussed, offers, I think, a corrective to the melancholizing terms of reception of Arab culture in transnational context, increasingly cast under the shadow of Euro-American soft power dominance. Thank you so much. I'll leave that there as a quote from the book. Oh, here.
Thank you for that talk. So what we're going to do next is I want to open it up for any questions people have, any pressing questions, and then we will have a little discussion following up on the talk. If anyone has a question, please step up to the mic so that we can all hear you. Just introduce yourself very, very briefly, and please ask your question. A minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ahlan wa sahlan. Hello. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
So my question, I don't think I was the target audience, right, for your speech. I'm just a high schooler, and a lot of the concepts regarding literature and poeticism were a little above my pay grade. But I am very interested in the historical aspect. So I was curious on what it would look like for the Palestinian dream to be honored, right? So I think there's a lot of I see the pendulum swing very rapidly between Palestinians advocating for, a one-state solution and a two-state solution. And I was curious whether you thought there could be, if the Palestinian dream would be like honored, if there were ever negotiations with Israel, or if it would kind of, I guess, be disrespectful to the people who fought so hard to achieve justice.
Yeah, that's a very relevant question to my paper. Now, obviously, is this work?
So there's some on switch.
I thought I did switch.
It is on, it is.
Oh, it is on. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
On the mic? Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you for your question. No, seriously, I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, basically, I'm addressing that question, which is a political question, but through like a humanistic vision, which tries to attend to the precarities and, vulnerabilities of both. If only we understand that that as Palestinians and Israelis, we're both exposed to each other, exposed in the sense that we're both vulnerable, and take that notion of vulnerability and mutual exposure as a basis for negotiating what is best for both entities, for both Israel and Palestine, etc. Because, Israel is a fact. Nobody is going to, nobody is just going to destroy Israel. It cannot be destroyed. So it's a fact. So the whole idea that, oh, they want to destroy us, they want to, kill us, whatever, that's just, rhetoric. Okay, it's not true. Then, if you are now in the leader, let's say, if you are in the driving seat, as Israel is, if you have all the weapons at your disposal, if you are the settler colonial power, then you really need to open up. Because one of the solution has been a binational state, okay, which seems to be the only possible solution for some, although, the rhetoric of the two-state solution is still circulating, although everybody knows there is no land on which to establish, a Palestinian state. In any case, so the issue is that really, I mean, Palestinians ask for different things. Of course, they ask for, I mean, at the basic human everyday level, I think what Palestinians are asking for is both their rights as people who live there, as, hopefully citizens. I mean, even the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, they're being discriminated against. They do not have the same rights as Israel. I mean, you've seen that in the acceptance speech of Yuval in the No Other Land. You've seen, I mean, he's Israeli. I mean, I can't like speak for him, but he said it. He said, this is a Palestinian guy. He does not have the same rights. I have rights. He doesn't have it. So what else can we say? So let's start with that. Start with, giving the same rights to both people. And then, I mean, of course, with that comes, I mean, if you look at so many Palestinian films and novels, I mean, Palestinians ask for sometimes, really on a daily basis, like dignity. I mean, what is this whole humiliation about checkpoints and all of that, so in other words, if you're Palestinian, what are you going to do if you're, being humiliated on a daily basis? Because there is a problem with that, even in the old bad days, even when there were like slave plantations, the owners of the slaves used to have parties on weekends for the slaves so that they can, channel their excited anger. Do you know what I mean? And that was actually the most, for Fanon, he said that those parties were the most dangerous thing because they perpetuated the state of slavery. Because you see, when the slaves channel that anger into dance and into, this agitation, etc., then they accept to go back, to work on Mondays, etc. So it was a very dangerous thing. Palestinians are not even getting that. That's why they're rising up against, So anyway, so I can't give you a political answer, but as I said, I think there are certain things that could be done immediately, which is, give equal rights to these people who live in the same land. And then let's take it from there. But I don't think Israel is going to accept a Palestinian state. Even if they do, it will be like just a non-state that cannot have sovereignty, that cannot have its own army, that cannot have anything. It's just What do you think?
Well, what do I think?
If you ask the question, you must have an answer.
Yeah, I think the only way forward, honestly, is a two-state solution. I am really appreciative of what you were saying with that, like, I mean, Israel's kind of here to stay, right? And I mean, I think the rhetoric is very different. Like, so I'm Jewish. I've taken Arabic for a number of years. I'm very interested in international affairs and this conflict. And I think I do see a lot of similarities between the story of the Palestinians and the story of the Jews who eventually became the Israelis. The only difference is the Israelis were the ones who won and are now subjugating the Palestinians. But I see I think really the first step forward is an understanding both sides. And I think one of the issues from the Israeli perspective, right, is that sometimes it feels like it's hard to find somebody who can speak for the Palestinians. And what I mean by that is currently the Palestinian Authority, last time I checked, has like a 4% acceptance rate, and how much people will listen to them. Hamas, obviously, Israel has a hard time accepting they could be good faith. Obviously, on the side of the Israeli government, right, Netanyahu would never allow a Palestinian state as long as he could. But then any Israeli leftist, a lot of Israeli leftists do advocate for two-state solution, yet sometimes I think from the Israeli perspective, it's hard to see that. Like there, I know about Marwan Barghouti. I hope I'm not butchering his name. I know he has advocated for quite a bit. I know he's currently in Israeli prison.
He's in prison.
Yeah, he's in prison. So that's a challenge as well, right? Is we would have to do that. And I've been doing more research into that, but that's kind of the perspective of some of the difficulties on that. And as well, like it's very interesting. I mean, I think on the Israeli side, when it comes to the settlements, they're abhorrent and or a massive detriment to peace. And then as well, the right of return, the challenge of how to balance a bunch of refugees coming in, because inherently the thought process behind Israel. Have you read Jabotinsky's The Wall?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's a very, very famous literature. Some of the I'm not sure if it was him or Herzl who said it, but like the idea is throughout history, when Jews have been the minority, they were subjected to pogroms, to second-class citizens. In Turkey, they were Dinhi in the Middle Ages.
But that's not like a question for the Palestinians,
Yeah,
because the Palestinians did not.
they did not do that.
Commit
No.
those atrocities. They did not commit the Holocaust, because if you listen to the American media, you think about, for instance, even the sentence that this is the worst massacre, which is October 7th, since the Holocaust. You would think, oh, the Palestinians committed the Holocaust. Because they're like, okay, like for somebody who's ignorant, who doesn't know history, and that's the majority. They would say, so that's the Palestinians have nothing to do with it, in other words. This idea, the dhimmi status, etc. I mean, you had 8 centuries of Muslim Spain, where you have the 3 religions, and you could read. There's a lot of stuff on that. You could read that there was a convivencia, like people living together in harmony. So, in other words, the Jews have never had a problem with the Arabs or the Muslims. Okay, and so the oldest synagogue is in my own country, Tunisia. The oldest, like the oldest existing synagogue in the island of Jerba in Tunisia. So. And if you go there, you see it's all Tunisian Jews.
Yeah.
If those Tunisian Jews move to Israel, they'll become second-class Jews. It's like, for instance, there's a whole label for Ethiopian Jews. And Ethiopian Jews are not allowed to procreate when they went to Israel because of fear of contaminating, the white supremacists. I mean, there are lots of problems. Don't get me started. Thank you for your question. Let's move on.
Yeah. I apologize for the question. I need to
Okay, please go. Thank you. Hi, thank you for your talk. This is a completely different question. I was really struck by the examples from Darwish and how you showed that each one of them has this really deeply rooted location, whether it's from the Quran or it's something that people say every day. And I was wondering if you could reflect on the embodied or the sensorial nature of that. Could you say a little bit about what it feels like to speak something that takes a twist at the end when your mouth is already like forming the normal ending of it? Do you know what I mean?
No, I mean, in my experience, that was a very for me. I would say it's a pedagogical experience because it's really I don't know how to put it, because I think that act of trying to figure out what this distorted idiom means is not, it's an act that takes time and effort and energy. And within that, that's the pedagogical lesson. And that's also the time needed for you to empathize, okay? And also to try to learn where this idiom comes from and what is the original idiom and why did the poet distort it? You know what I mean? Or why did he put all this work into bringing this new idiom? Because I think it's not just a linguistic game, because you can think about it as a linguistic game, because it has been, really, especially since deconstruction, everybody, even like restaurants now, like make neologisms and blend things and all sorts of things, Well, actually, one of the solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian question was Muammar Gaddafi, the deposed president, he said Israel. So it's like Israel Palestine becomes Israel. That's his solution is just let's create a name and people will come under the name. But anyway, so it's not in that sense, but in the case of an idiom, because an idiom is more, it's a chunk. And each idiom also has a story, like from the Quran, it has an entire story behind it, which is the fifth, pillar of Islam, pilgrimage. And what does pilgrimage mean? Because you would wonder, what does it mean? And why, is it juxtaposed to that? So I think I would say, the value is about the effect, it's about its effect, and it's also resonance in the reader or the listener, okay? Because now, for instance, we use the expression "tasbihun ala watan" in the Arab world all the time, and we use it in sometimes in a it depends on the tone. Sometimes in a hopeful tone, and sometimes in a pessimistic tone. It's like it's never going to happen. "Tasbihun ala watan," it's never going to happen. So I see the value. I think the value is pedagogical, to put it in a very short meaning. Does it?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We have another question.
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk. So Ghassan Kanafani came up with the concept of resistance literature, أدب المقاومة
Yes,
الشعبية. And he especially focused on poetry, and he talked about poetry.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, I would like to know more about how you sort of perceive or how do you conceptualize this kind of melancholy acts in literature in relation to resistance literature. Are they different? Are they similar? Do they sort of feed each other?
No,
Does it make sense?
oh, absolutely.
Thank
It's it really makes sense. There is one simple question that I asked myself when I was writing this book, and the earlier one, which is also almost, concerned with the same topic, signifying loss. So the question is that, okay, I'm all for resistance, I'm all for decolonization, but how do you sustain the decolonial project? How do you sustain it? You see, that's the question. Like you wake up on a daily basis, like how do you do it? You just say, I am on a mission, because it's not easy for a writer to get so invested in what is called a lost cause. And many people see the Palestinian cause as a lost cause, Maybe the more it's quite ironic and tragically ironic that the more the more we think we're really progressive, we're progressing, the farther we are from a solution, because the facts on the ground are changing, and not towards us. So then the question for me, if you are a writer, and a Palestinian writer for that matter, and see, for Palestinians, the act of writing is different from, I'm not essentializing here, but I'm just being reminiscent of a review by Anton Shamas, if you know him. He's actually a Palestinian writer who wrote Arabesque in Hebrew, and then it was translated into English and translated into Arabic. And so he wrote a really scathing review of Mahmoud Darwish's Diwan. I forgot the name of the Diwan, but the Diwan was mostly constituted of love poems. It's all, you open it, you read it, it's love poem after love poem. And so what, I think it's the one that he wrote in 98. I remember the date, I just forgot the title, but anyway. So then the scathing critique from Anton Shamaz is that he said that Mahmoud Darwish threw the Palestinian question out of the window. Because now he's just writing love poetry. And, it's like, so in other words, you see, I'm trying to bring to your attention what it means, if you are a Palestinian writer, to start with, there is something, it's like as if you have to speak to the Palestinian questions. And actually, Darwish was himself so, if you read his latest work, like في حضرة الغياب, in the presence of absence, for instance, you will see how obsessed he was. And he was asking the question, what does it mean to be a Palestinian poet? What does it mean to be a non-Palestinian poet? Why is it that Palestinian poets are always expected? And when I say expected, it means coerced. Coerced to write about Palestine. Yeah, exactly. So no, but that's the anticipation, is that, I mean, even now, allegorically, here, when we receive, like in the Western Academy in general, and American Academy, when we teach or when we read Palestinian literature, we expect that it's going to be about Palestine and the Palestinian question. Is there any other expectation? So we put forward the political issue, and that's a problem. And that's why I wanted to speak about poetic form. I wanted to speak about aesthetics, because I wanted to try to deconstruct that view. I wanted to, or at least to unsettle the view that, all you're looking for is a political solution. No, I mean, these people write and they have like aesthetic projects, and they're working on idioms. They're working on the tradition. They're trying to deconstruct and construct a genealogy of decolonization that goes back to a revision, not only of the Quranic idiom, but also of the classical Arabic idiom, trying to modernize it, to transplant it in the political present. So all that is going on. And then when we read a Palestinian poem or watch a Palestinian film, all we think about is the Palestinian question. And for me, that's really very reductive and very unfair to the poets, to the authors, to the filmmakers. And that's what I tried to redress in the book I was writing. So that's why I bring attention to the aesthetic. I'm not saying the aesthetic is not political, but I'm just also trying to draw attention to the value of the literature, of the film, of the culture, regardless of the political. Okay? But I'm working with the political, so don't get me wrong. So political is central, but at the same time, also the aesthetic is very central. So now to come back to your question, this was a preface. So your question is how to sustain a decolonial project. Okay? I mean, did you see the nuance what Lukács says? The hopelessness of the cause and the hopelessness of abandoning it. See, it's in between. In between, there must be an emotion, an effect that sustain any type of project that you would see as hopeless. And that emotion, that effect, has to be melancholic for me. Why? Because you're introduced to the it's like not Derrida, Heidegger say you're thrownness, this notion of thrownness. You're thrown on the world stage as an Arab. You're thrown on the world stage. You find yourself already in a legacy of defeat after defeat, a seriality of defeats. So then, to start with, you have all this legacy of losses to think about. Okay, and that's the melancholic gesture. Like, in other words, part of the subject formation in the Arab world is this melancholic gesture, is to reflect. I'm not saying rescue. I mean, at least to reflect on that seriality of losses that you have inherited, and whether you accept it or not, has found itself into your making. If not into the making of your consciousness, it's in the making of the much richer unconscious. The unconscious is much richer, doesn't see time, etc. So it's really a creative space. So I think it is that fact which is effective that would, I would say, propel writers, poets to write, because they have something to say about what went into their making as post-colonial subjects, okay, or as Arab subjects. in the present time. And actually, I don't speak about myself in the book, but most of it is my experience. When I was young, I mean, the entire, my entire making and upbringing was almost like, uh, uh, I don't know how to put it, but I felt like the colonial mentality informed the way I was growing up. And the way I can even differentiate between good fruits, bad fruits. So if it's bad fruit, Arab fruit. If it's good fruit, it's European. Seriously, and that's like across the spectrum. Even I was a big fan of pears. So then the pears is the cheap ones are called Arab pears, and the good ones, the more expensive ones, are called Suri, which means like French, European, in Tunis. And that's what I said.
Yeah.
That doesn't apply to Lebanon.
No, but specify.
No.
The context.
Yeah. I think I mentioned I'm Tunisian. Yeah. Okay. So anyway,
That's a great moment.
does that answer your question? I can go on because this is like my.
Let's direct this conversation a little bit. Shadi, you had a question.
Hi, thank you so much. There was so much to digest there that, I'm not sure my questions are fully thought out, but I was wondering, first of all, are there expressions of melancholy? I don't know if you would consider them melancholy acts or not, that do not meet this definition of melancholization. How do I pronounce it? Melancholization. So instead of expressions of hope, expressions of anger or other affect that is maybe more destructive, or because and I'll tell you the context I'm kind of immersed in right now is the Iranian context. And I see a lot of what was in your presentation in the Iranian context, but I also see other things going on, particularly in the diaspora, which are expressions of melancholy, but don't necessarily take you in this direction. So I was wondering if you've kind of given some thought to that. And then also in relation to the Iranian context, so if, this is a midwife to decolonization, I'm just wondering, about context, and Tunisia would also kind of fall into this. And I think I know what your answer might be, but I want to throw it out there nonetheless. A lot of Iranian expressions of melancholy have to do with not colonization or imperialism, but with the state, the Islamic regime. So the internal, which is engaging in internal colonization. But nonetheless, and in the Tunisian case, at least if you read it in kind of just more immediate sense. So is all of this kind of unique to the colonial experience, or?
Yes, that's a beautiful question because it gives me the space because, I mean, I don't want to make it sound that my book is just about colonialism. It's also about authoritarianism. And also I go to the family. There's a chapter on masculinity. They're all intertwined, so interconnected. You have I mean, the concentric circles almost of domination and power. And the interest, I mean, of course, the Iranian context might be different. But if you put it on a global context, on a transnational context, and see the ways in which also Iran is trying to negotiate its relation to the new global order, and whether it wants this weapon, or whether it has this weapon, or whether it is trying to create this weapon in order for it to have a footing on a global stage and be able also to negotiate on equal footing. So that's a question. So then that also, even Iran cannot be in a sense, how do I say, like severed from that global hegemony, which wants this weapon only for itself. That doesn't. I mean, I don't want to discuss Iran because I'm not an expert. But I think in the case of the Arab world. If you look at the history of all these post-colonial nations, there is almost like an intertwinement of authoritarianism and colonialism and what is called neo-colonialism, okay? Because I don't think the neo-colonial powers cared that much about democracy. They only wanted a dictator. I mean, look, Trump in his first term called Sisi my little dictator, which means, like, okay, that's like an expression of endearment, which means that he doesn't care whether he's a dictator or not, as long as he just, abides by what he's told. Do you see what I mean? So then if you look at the entire history of Tunisia and the ways in which many people were speaking about conspiracy theory behind, the ways in which Bourguiba was gotten rid of in a palace coup, and then Ben Ali, there was an arrangement for him to fly to Saudi Arabia, the ouster of the dictator, and then Mubarak, and then, you look, I mean, you can't deny some kind of imperial and colonial, intervention in Libya in particular. That was so clear, So then what I'm trying to say is that maybe maybe the book is about the Arab War. So, but I think the question of melancholicization, I'm sure you will find aspects of it that apply to the ways in which Iranian artists, and I watched some Iranian films, so I know the Iranian artists try to negotiate their relation with the regime, So and how they're trying to express themselves, how they're trying to express their dissent, and how their projects or aesthetic projects in particular are sustained. They're sustained on the basis of that affect. They're trying to recuperate something that they do not have, okay, and recover. It's like, I like this notion of to recover and to recover from. So like, what to do? Maybe, recovery or recovery from, so sometimes recovery from something means, you let it go. Or to recover, it means, you kind of recuperate it and regain it and work with it. In any case, so the question of dignity in Iran becomes very important, the dignity of the Iranian subjects, and that was the question that started the Tunisian revolution, because Mohammed Bouazizi was humiliated by a policewoman, who cursed his father. And so that's why when the first uprising, like the first demonstrations, there were demonstrations about karama. Karama, which means the exact word for dignity. Karama. So those little things again. I mean, it's not literally dignity. I mean, each human being must have dignity. You find that even in the Enlightenment philosophy, Kant and Hegel, the question of dignity is huge. So I hope this answers the question.
I have another question at the
Oh, you
beginning.
had another question? Yeah.
No, the first question was about if there are melancholy acts that are not about hope.
Oh,
So,
well, no, absolutely, because the melancholy act. I mean, when you think about this guy I was mentioning, for instance, I mean, there are many other examples, like the Lebanese poet. What's his name? The Lebanese poet who killed himself in 1982 when Israel invaded Lebanon. His name escaped. Chris Allah? No. Yeah, I mean, I have him in the book. I just forgot the name. In any case, but even if you think about Bouazizi, he immolated himself. That's a melancholy. I mean, for him, he lost his life. That's not what is so hopeful about him. Like, he lost hope, and that's why he immolated himself. I mean, the whole idea of a melancholy act is its ambivalence. I'm trying to capture the ambivalence because what happens with Bouazizi is that he immolated himself, he killed himself, but that entire episode became very inspiring for the dissident people to rise up and to try to protest against what happened to Bouazizi. So you see, then an act that is melancholy become melancholicizing. Does that make sense? So I'm interested in that. I'm interested in like a moment of failure, a moment of defeat, which is turned the other way, because there is no other way for us defeated people. Like, to start with, we're defeated. To start with, and that could apply also not just to me as a political subject, but could apply as a human being on a daily basis when you fail in doing something. So it's either you turn around or you just stay in that position of failure. I mean, of course, I'm being reductive here, but yeah.
I think this is a fantastic moment to go back to the book a little bit.
Yeah.
So I want to do two things, and we're gonna make this brief. So, and then we will come back to you all if there's still any remaining questions. So I think it's not a coincidence that several of the questions are about melancholy and melancholia.
Yeah.
It is your central concept. And so my first question about that is, melancholy, as you mentioned, is famously a Freudian concept.
Mhm.
He, for context, made a distinction between grief and melancholy. I'm simplifying here, but grief is described as a healthy process of getting over tragedy, while melancholia is a failed process where you do not get over a tragic event and you are stuck in it and there's just this repetition going on, right? So I understand your intervention in this book in one way as trying to reclaim that concept and in a way redefine it where you don't see it as a kind of failure or stuckness, but a potential means or way towards decolonization.
Mhm.
That's how at least I understand the part of the argument. So one thing that I was wondering about is it's an interesting choice to go to Freud for a concept, to talk about a way of decolonization for Arabs.
Mm.
So why would you go outside the Arab world for a concept? Were there other concepts perhaps from the Arab world, from Arab literature, that you thought about as you were putting this book together?
Thank you. I actually did not go to Freud. He came to me. No. And no. Actually, I have a story because I mentioned briefly other side, the notion of travel theory. And Sador Said, I encourage you to read. He has two essays about travel theory. In one essay, he says when concepts travel, because concepts travel, whether we like it or not. I mean, we are all inheritors of, let's say, European enlightenment. So how are you going to do about it? Provincialize it, bracket it, whatever. It's in the discourse. What are you going to do about it? I mean, many post-colonial critics have thought about that and they just gave up. They said, okay, you have to live with it. Like, think about, provincializing Europe by Chakrabarti, for instance. So there is that issue of what to do with European knowledge, what to do with European enlightenment. And that issue is most extreme in the Arab world because we haven't produced anything. We just, most of the, it's not that there is nothing there, there is a lot there. It's just, there hasn't been, even the guys like Jabiri, like the intellectuals that we tend to think about as really huge. I mean, when you turn around and look at their projects in general, it's like, what did they construct? They didn't construct the genealogy. For me, like, they didn't construct the genealogy of thought. And so Ibn Khaldun becomes more relevant as somebody, who really constructed something that you could say, this is the origin of sociology, or this is the origin, even of psychoanalysis. The way I look at Asabiya and, things like that. So anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that, look at how do we have, like, how do concepts travel when they travel, and how they change meaning. So that's why other side in the first essay say, when they travel, they become weak. That actually was his conclusion. And then he wrote another essay to argue the exact reverse. He said, when they travel, they become radical. They get radicalized. So then, and then one thing I noticed in Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, the chapter 5, where he speaks about case histories, but really short case histories, not in the way that Freud, wrote case histories, okay? And in there, Fanon totally overturns the concept of melancholy. And he says, most people, when they think about melancholy, they think about the European context, and they think melancholics commit suicide. He said, in the Algerian context, they do not commit suicide; they commit homicide because they kill themselves and they kill the colonizer with them. So then that what seems to be a pathology in Fanon becomes also a form of resistance because it just has to be mobilized. Because whether you like it or not, I mean, when he was practicing in Algeria, he found that most Algerian subjects, of course, they show symptoms of melancholy. And of course, one of the things that people forget is that if you do not show a symptom of, let's say, depression, melancholy, pathology, when the context calls for the appearance of it, then there is something wrong with you. Actually, like if you don't show melancholy, then there must be something wrong with you. Because how could you go through colonialism, oppression on a daily basis, and are still not mad or sick or insane? You have to be insane. And actually, then insanity, pathology, the symptom becomes your only vehicle to actually regain sanity. Because if you don't, then there's something wrong with it. And actually, that's actually there is a two German psychoanalysts who made that argument about Germans after World War II, and they said Germans do not feel they still identify with the Führer, and they have not really shown any signs of regret, of melancholy, of depression about what has been going on. So they draw that conclusion. It's like the absence of the symptom, the absence of the pathology becomes itself the problem. So anyway, so that's why, first of all, we need to honor the symptom, okay? Because the symptom shows that you are alive, okay? It shows that you're actually reacting in the path that would lead to something. So then I actually came to melancholy through Fanon, who already did the work for me. But of course, Fanon, he wrote about it really very briefly, and he did not.
Not central.
Yeah, it's not. No, it's not. I agree. But that's what is interesting about being a critic, is that you're able to look at some minor, and I like the minor, as I said, kind of funny. So you look at some minor concept in somebody's work, and you take it and you expand it. And that's exactly what I thought I was doing. Because I thought that idea, because this is what geniuses do. I mean, Fanon is a genius. And actually, Fanon died 36 years like Kanafan. So those guys are geniuses, both of them. They died the same age. 36. It's unbelievable. So anyway, so for me, because he's a genius, even like a marginal remark must be important. And so that's why, so my inspiration comes, I would see my inspiration as an expansion of Fanon, who has done the work rather than as a going to Freud. Although I really like Freud, so I don't have any problem with going to Freud or him coming to me, whatever.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm gonna follow up a little bit on that, and then I'll move on to something else. But the response that registering that there's something wrong, so that feeling of melancholia is informative in that way, is well taken. But do you think there may be a danger in getting too comfortable in the melancholic condition? So celebrating that as the avenue towards decolonization, isn't there a danger of getting too comfortable, being defeated and being sad? And if anything, it goes against the decolonization project that you're saying it helps us with?
That's a beautiful question, because there is, I mean, it's not my intention to romanticize melancholy, because if you've been through melancholy and depression, there's nothing to romanticize about it. The idea is au contraire, and when I speak about, actually, in the book, because there's no time here to, in the book I speak about a spectrum of affects. So I put affects on a continuum, because the interesting thing about affects, and also there is a question what was asked to me about other emotions, like for instance, anger, viscerality. Yeah, I mean, I opted for the kind of affects that linger with you. Because sometimes, for instance, anger for me is an emotion. And many people really differentiate between affect and emotion, in the sense that for me, an emotion is short-lived, but there are other people who say an emotion is actually something that lasts. Well, for me, an emotion like anger, you can be angry, but then you could try to change the subject or somebody cracks a joke and you start laughing. Okay, so for me, that's not something that lingers, that tarries with you, that stays with you. But so that's why I'm interested in emotions that are longer. That's why they're called affects. I mean, there are other ones. I mean, for instance, Jameson said, we don't have affects anymore. We have intensities. You go through an intense moment of joy and then an intense moment of depression. So he says in our his whole book about postmodernism was about the waning of affect, that we used to have a hermeneutics of suspicion where you think a lot about things and you cannot decide because you need more time. And he's saying now in postmodernism, that was in modernism. He says in postmodernism we do not have that. We just have moments of intensity. And he was taking that a little bit from Deleuze, a little bit from Bergson, a little bit. But anyway, so in my case, I was also trying to respond to Jameson because when he wanted the political in culture, he actually never spoke about American culture. He went to Asian, Chinese, Senegalese culture to show that film, Senegalese film, Chinese literature, they still have a political edge. Okay, they still have that, and for me, I translated it as an affective edge. Okay, so that's what I was trying to do also with affect. It's that for me, it does exist in a continuum with the other emotions, but it all coalesces under melancholy. And of course, I also differentiate between what is melancholite, which means like a surface reaction. So for instance, if somebody loses something and then they react in violence, that's a reactionary. That's like melancholic. It's not melancholic. So I make a difference between the melancholic has to have like the minimum basic amount of intellectual work and effort. Okay. So then I believe Fanon put a lot of work and he was melancholic himself. Freud was melancholic, So in a sense, there is no romanticization of that. Although there is a risk, the risk does exist, but nobody is going to really go on a demonstration and say, let's melancholicize, so I don't know. There is a risk, but yeah. Yeah, I'm not turning into a slogan. I'm just trying to explain the how do I say, the force of the literature and the force of the culture, which has always been seen as a culture of defeat and backwardness. That's so in other words, you can argue that my use of melancholy is purely descriptive. Yeah, I'm not prescribing it. So that's the thing. I'm not prescribing it, but I'm saying this is what Kanafani is doing. He's melancholicizing the idiom. He's melancholicizing, empathy, solidarity, etc. So, like when Kanafani writes that letter, what is he doing? Yeah, he's melancholicizing Mustafa by telling him the story of Nadia. And Nadia itself in Arabic is a call. So even the choice of the name is very significant. So everything, you feel like everything is really done in such a way that somebody has been thinking so profoundly about every little detail. And then how do you honor that effort without thinking about an effect that stays for a long time and sustains that activity and energy, which he's not getting paid for? Is he getting paid for that? He's not doing it for like some kind of capitalist or material, he's just doing it because it's worth doing for him. So that's, and I see my effort here as really kind of, trying to honor that effort that is invisible or that has been invisibilized in the works of artists and filmmakers who have really invested the energy.
Thank you for that answer. There are several things that happen in the book. He starts with melancholy as a concept, but you respond to several issues in studies of the Arab world and Arab literature since 67, right, and 48. So one of the most let's say now, dominant issues is the Islamic revival, right? And you address that in a chapter in the book. So if, speaking of melancholia and stuckness and the defeat that you talked about, so the options so far are, there was, as you described in the book, an attempt to join modernity as a project that fails. And then there is a return either to Arab nationalism or to a revival of Islam, the origins, right? The great origins. So do you believe there's a different narrative that the region, people of the region could turn towards, or does it always have to be one of these three options, which none of which seems to have succeeded so far?
I wish I have an answer to that question, because then I would have been, celebrated. No, I mean, it's a difficult question, because sometimes, it's like, sometimes you make choices and you feel like you're choosing, but the imagination, which is the vehicle of the choosing, is itself coerced. And that's the thing. That's the thing. It's like, I always tell my students who really love road trips, especially I teach in California, in LA, and I love road trips, and each student, of course, has a car. You can't live without a car in LA. And I think that's liberating, of course. Oh, I got my new blah, 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 Honda Civic. And Honda Civic at the time was like, because it's 14,000. So I don't know what the price now. Anyway, so I always tell them, seriously, what do you think of as your choice to buy a car, to go on road trip, has been thought for you in the 40s and 50s, when the people who really thought about how to build LA as a city, they built it in such a way that there is no public transportation, so that they can sell the cars. La Rouge, was very much involved in the construction of LA as a city. I mean, until now they're actually building the metro. The metro is reaching UCLA in 2026, which is incredible. And they've been building this forever. So can you believe that? But when the city was thought in the 40s and 50s, it was thought from the perspective of selling cars. So in other words, when the students who are, of course, my students, go on road trips and buy cars, they're thinking they're expressing their freedom. They're thinking they're expressing their choices. They're making a choice and they're dealing with it. But then somebody else, you don't know that actually you're being coerced. And that's what I'm interested in. So, and when I think about the Arab world and all the acrobatics, the words, it's like peace, no peace, boycott, no boycott. Either way, you're not in the driving seat. The Arab world is not in the driving seat. That's my issue. Like my issue is that no matter, that's why that chapter is called Melancholy Islam, because you're not in the driving seat. No, like you could say, I mean, look, the critique, for instance, of capitalism is the same critique verbatim. A Marxist and an Islamist, they make the same critique verbatim. The same. If they criticize capitalism, they will produce the same critique, and I've seen that over and over again. Of course, they have different solutions. But the Islamists want a caliphate, and imara and whatever, and the leftists want a socialist state, etc. So the solutions are different, but the critique is the same. So then, whether to go back to Islam is like in Egypt, Islam wal hal, or whether to modernize, which was what Bourguiba did, it's like Bourguiba said, I'm a Frenchified from my toes to my head, it's like, let's become modern, let's forget about, let's not fast during Ramadan, because Bourguiba, is a rumor. Oh, there you go. So he's most famous for like drinking on national TV, drinking a glass of juice during Ramadan. So because he said we belong to an underdeveloped nation, and if we spend we cannot afford to have an entire month people fasting and coming to work and not doing as much work. So he was encouraging people to break the fast, and he said actually, he said there was a ghazwa, which is that there was a war where the Prophet encouraged his fighters to break the fast so that they can have energy to fight the war. So he said, we're fighting underdevelopment. We're fighting colonialism, so we don't have to fast. So then you see, so then Bourguiba was adhering to some reverse thing. But for me, all of these are acrobatics, because in the end, there is a new colonial system, a new colonial hegemony, which is based on financial capitalism, which means, if you're getting loans from the IMF, the World Bank, if you are dependent on the dollar, etc., and then whatever you do, you're still within that orbit of the hegemony of the. It's like, recently, there was this. Frederick Jameson said, and also Slavoj Zizek, he says, he says it's more easy. It's easier to imagine. This is what he said, and it was repeated again and again. I'm sure you heard about it. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. When somebody from Asia took that, he says, no, it is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of Western dominance and hegemony. So you see, so Jameson said it in the context of the US, but then when it traveled, it changed. Because if you are in South Asia, in Africa, the feeling of capitalism is different. It's colonialism. That's why we speak about imperialism. So then that's, I don't know, it's
Yes,
another way of answering the question. I don't think I answered your question, so
it's
I'm
okay, but
sorry.
you thought about it with me, no. So on this very positive note,
That's positive.
are there any remaining questions? All right, yes. Go ahead.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
I was wondering, you mentioned a lot of like psychoanalysis when talking about your book, or psychoanalysis, I guess. I was kind of, I think we're gonna have to ruminate on it for a bit. I think some of the words look similar, like colonialization is definitely I would have to ruminate on that.
Okay.
But I was just wondering, like, what other like psychoanalysts informed your view like of your book other than Freud? And like I know you mentioned Lacan like earlier. You kind of made like a joke about him. So like I was wondering if you like
Not
contrast.
my favorite.
Not your all right.
Well, I mean, I have to read them as a scholar. You have to read the stuff.
Yeah, like I'm not very well read on a lot of his stuff either. So I was wondering if you could talk about maybe like who else inspired you, maybe what other psychoanalysts you like kind of contrast with like Lacan.
Yeah. No, I think, mostly Fanon. He was a psychiatrist and also a psychoanalyst. And he had a very tremendous experience of psychoanalysis in France. And then, of course, most, remarkably in Algeria and then in Tunisia. Many people forget that Fanon, when he became part of the FLN, he was, he ran away because he was targeted by the French. So he had to go to Tunisia. And in Tunisia, he also worked in the Manuba Hospital, which is a hospital for mad people or whatever, So he worked a lot with psychiatric hospital. Thank you. Yeah, psychiatric hospital. Yeah, so Fanon is a tremendous influence on me. Of course, I've read a lot of psychoanalysts like Winnicott, Kristeva, but I sometimes, when you're trying to think who influenced you, because sometimes the things you read, the text you read, and probably you have experience of that, is that they show up in your thinking without you being able to trace them to a specific point. Because, sometimes you read things and you forget them. It's like the requirements of being a good poet. The old idea about how to be a good poet? You have to read all poetry and forget it. That's actually was the requirement. Like the requirement, how to be a good poet? Read all poetry, but forget it. Because if you don't forget it, then you're going to just reproduce it. That's why many young poets now, when they speak, they write, you think they're bad dervishes. They're trying to write like Darwish, because they were not able to forget their wish. You see, if they forgot their wish, then they can become their own voice. And that's the anxiety of influence, that Harold Bloom spoke about, etc. Anyway, so to go back to your question, yes, I think it's not, but I don't know why people are hard on Freud. And they have been for so long. but they don't really realize how much of a genius Freud was. He created an entire science. He's the initiator of a discursive practice. He's not just an author. This is what Foucault said. Even Foucault, who hated Freud, and Deleuze, even for like hated Freud, he wrote a book, Anti-Oedipus, who thought that psychoanalysis and capitalism, they go together. And they do, actually, because when you think about desire, you think about, the capitalist system, they go together. But even Foucault, what is an author? He speaks about Freud as an initiator of discursive practice. So it's a big thing. He came up with an entire school of thought, which was integrated with Marxism when we think about the Frankfurt School, when we think about the rise of critical theory, for instance. So I would always go back to Freud. But that's enough. Could be enough. But but it was mostly Freud and Fanon. Those are the ones I can think about. But there is many more that I cannot, think about. Yeah.
Yeah, and you contrasted Lacan at all, like through your book?
There is a whole chapter where I read Lacan. I mean, what I don't, the problem with Lacan is that the linguistic structure thing. When you read Lacan, you feel that history does not exist, like material history. Material history, like
Yeah.
you feel like it doesn't. Everything is part of a structure of signifier, signified, and of a network. A linguistic network that almost has nothing to do with material history. So that's my issue with him, with Lacan. I mean, and that's actually the issue of many. I mean, it's a very famous critique of Lacan, But many people, including Marxists, they find a lot of value in his definition of the symbolic, in his definition of desire, because I think his definition of desire is very useful.
Yeah.
For a critique of capitalism, for instance, So there are lots of things if you pick and choose, but as a whole, there is something also. There is a problem with
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's like in a void almost.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, yeah, that's all I had. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your questions.
Thank you, Nuri, and thank you all for joining us.